At 62, Ruth Macklin had $211 in her checking account, a canvas duffel bag with a broken zipper, and a divorce decree that had been signed, notarized, and handed to her across a conference table like a receipt for something she hadn't purchased. She had been married to Dennis Macklin for 31 years. She had baked the wedding cake herself, 3 tiers, cream cheese frosting, fresh raspberry filling between each layer, and carried it from the kitchen to the reception hall in the passenger seat of their first car, because they couldn't afford a caterer. That was 1991. By 2022, Dennis had a real estate attorney named Craig Pelham, a clause buried in the settlement about primary financial contributions to marital property acquisition, and a new address that Ruth learned about from a mutual friend who felt terrible telling her. The house on Whitmore Road was gone. The savings account was split in a way that wasn't equal, but was technically legal. What remained was the $211, a storage unit she had 60 days to vacate, and a name on a property record she'd found in her mother's papers. A small commercial building on County Road 4, in a town called Harlan Springs, 4 hours south. Her mother, Eleanor Goss, had died in 2009. Ruth had never gone looking for what Eleanor might have left behind because she hadn't believed there was anything to find. Eleanor had been a baker, a quiet woman with flour-dusted hands who got up at 4 in the morning and didn't explain herself much. But when Ruth pried open the false-bottom drawer in Eleanor's old work table, the one she'd hauled out of the Harlan Springs building without fully examining, the one that had been in storage for 13 years, she found something Eleanor had spent 40 years quietly assembling. A trust. A deed. Envelopes addressed to Ruth by name, dated 1 per year, going all the way back to 1981. And she found out that her ex-husband's attorney, Craig Pelham, had known about the Harlan Springs property since at least 2019, and had said nothing. The conference room where Ruth's marriage officially ended was on the 14th floor of an office building in Fairfield. The carpet was gray. The windows had that light-diffusing film on them that made the sky look like a fax. Craig Pelham sat across from her with a yellow legal pad and a habit of clicking his pen that Ruth counted 17 times in 40 minutes. Her own attorney, a tired man named Gerald Fitch, who charged $185 an hour and smelled faintly of microwaved soup, had reviewed the settlement and told Ruth that fighting it would cost more than she stood to gain. Dennis had structured the marital assets so cleanly, Gerald said, running his finger down the page, that there wasn't much of a seam to pull. The house had been purchased primarily with money from Dennis's family. That was documented. The joint accounts had been drawing down for 2 years before Ruth even knew the marriage was ending. That was also documented. The retirement account split is fair, Gerald had said, not enthusiastically, like a man identifying a fair coin after examining both sides. Ruth had signed. Her hand didn't shake. She pressed the pen down and signed and set it on the table and folded her hands in her lap. Dennis wasn't in the room. She had expected him to be there. He wasn't. Craig Pelham slid a folder across to her. Inside was a copy of the decree and a business card. "If any questions come up," he said. He clicked the pen one more time, 18, and capped it. Ruth left with the folder, her coat over her arm, and $211 in her account because the rest had already transferred per the settlement terms that morning. Gerald Fitch walked her to the elevator and told her to take care of herself. The elevator doors closed and she rode down 14 floors alone and walked out onto the sidewalk into February air that was so cold it felt like a hand pressed flat against her face. She sat in her car for 11 minutes, not crying, just sitting. The heat vents blew and the window fogged, and she watched it fog and didn't wipe it. Then she started the car and drove to the storage unit on Millbrook Avenue, where she had 45 boxes, a disassembled bed frame, her mother's work table, and the canvas duffel with the broken zipper. She had been sleeping on a friend's couch for 3 weeks. She couldn't stay there much longer. She knew that without anyone saying it. She'd found the property record 2 days earlier, sorting through Eleanor's papers. The cardboard banker's box she'd never fully gone through. The one that had sat on the top shelf in the storage unit for 13 years under a plastic tarp. It was a faded photocopy of a deed, Harlan County Recorder's Office, dated August 1978. Eleanor M. Goss, sole owner, 4 County Road 4, Harlan Springs, described as a single-story commercial building, approximately 1,400 square feet, with a residential addition of approximately 340 square feet at the rear. Ruth had stared at it for a long time. She'd known her mother had run a bakery in Harlan Springs before Ruth was born, before Eleanor moved north. But Eleanor had never said she still owned the building. Eleanor had never said much about it at all. Ruth had always assumed it was sold or lost, the way working-class things are lost, quietly, without ceremony, without documents. She called the Harlan County Assessor's Office from the storage unit parking lot, standing outside because the signal was better. 12 minutes on hold. Then a woman named Cheryl told her that the property at 4 County Road 4 was currently assessed at $94,000, taxes current through the prior year. They had been paid from an escrow account, and that the property was recorded in the name of Eleanor M. Goss, with a transfer on death designation to Ruth Ann Macklin, filed in 2003. Ruth wrote it down on the back of the folder from Craig Pelham's office. She wrote down Cheryl's name. She wrote $94,000 and the address, and she stood in the cold parking lot until her ears ached, and then she went back inside and sat on a box and looked at the work table. Eleanor's work table was solid maple, 6 feet long, with a heavy breadboard top and a drawer on each end. Ruth had always known the table. It had been in the bakery, then in Eleanor's house in the kitchen, then in the storage unit. It was the one thing Ruth had been absolutely certain she was keeping. She hadn't opened the drawers in years. She pulled the right side one open. It stuck, then released, and found a box of birthday candles, a rubber spatula with a cracked handle, and a folded note she recognized as her mother's handwriting. A grocery list, maybe, from decades ago. Bread flour, butter, vanilla, the real kind. She pulled the left side one. It stuck harder, and when it came free there was a soft resistance beneath the false bottom. A separation she hadn't noticed before. The thin maple panel sitting a 1/4 inch higher than it should have. She pressed her fingers against it. It gave slightly, like there was something under it. She found a flathead screwdriver in the toolbox she kept in the unit and worked it gently along the edge, and the panel lifted. And she saw envelopes. A stack of them. A tin box. A small brass key on a loop of faded red twine. She didn't open any of them that night. She put the panel back and drove to her friend's couch and lay awake until 2 in the morning staring at the ceiling. The next day, she rented the smallest moving truck available for $67 and loaded the work table and the duffel and 4 boxes she couldn't part with. She left the rest. She locked the storage unit and pushed the key through the management office mail slot without going in. Then she pointed the truck south toward Harlan Springs and County Road 4. The drive took 4 hours and 20 minutes. The first 2 hours were interstate, then state route. Then the road narrowed to 2 lanes as she crossed into Harlan County. The sky was low and white, the kind of February sky that doesn't commit to weather. Bare trees lined both sides of Route 11, their branches crossing overhead in a lattice that made the light flicker. She passed a grain elevator, a farm stand closed for winter with a hand-lettered sign propped against the door, a church with a missing letter on its marquee board. County Road 4 turned off Route 11 at a blinking amber light. The road was paved, but barely, the edges crumbling into gravel and grass. She drove slowly, mailboxes spaced wide. A dog that watched her pass without moving. Then the road curved left and the building came into view, set back maybe 40 feet from the road. It was a single-story cinder block building with a poured concrete addition at the rear. which Ruth understood was the residential space from the deed description. The exterior had been painted at some point in a warm cream color, now faded to the color of old newspaper. A metal awning over the front door, one bracket loose, the awning canted at a slight angle. A hand-painted sign above the window, weathered to illegibility. She could make out the ghost of letters, the descender of a G, and what might have been an E. She sat in the truck with the engine running and looked at it for a minute. Longer. The February light was flat and the building sat in it without any particular drama. Just a building, just concrete and paint and time. She noticed the hinges on the front door. They were bright. Clean, freshly oiled hinges, not rusted, not seized, on a door that hadn't been opened in years by any other measure. Someone had been here recently enough to oil those hinges. She didn't know what that meant. She got out of the truck. The front door opened on the first try, the latch turning cleanly, the door swinging inward without a sound. That was the hinges. Someone had been here. She filed that away and stepped inside. The main room was roughly 900 square feet, she estimated, with a linoleum floor in a black and white tile pattern, one corner of it bubbled up and cracked, the rest holding. The walls were painted pale yellow, faded with a strip of chair rail molding at waist height. Along the left wall was a long stainless steel counter, commercial grade, bolted to the wall, the kind you ordered from a restaurant supply house. Above it, open shelving. Empty now. Below it, a row of doors that opened on pull-out drawers, the runners gummy with age, but intact. At the back of the main room was a pass-through window, shuttered with a hinged panel. She lifted it and looked through into the kitchen. She could see the corner of what she recognized as a commercial range, the side of a Vulcan 6-burner, cream-colored enamel, and above it the stainless hood, dark with old grease, and 3 rows of pothooks hanging empty. She walked around to the kitchen door, which was unlocked. The kitchen was 400 square feet, she guessed, with the Vulcan range, a stainless prep table, a 3-compartment sink, and a reach-in refrigerator that had been unplugged and propped open. The floor was quarry tile, red-brown, with a floor drain centered under the prep table. One of the fluorescent fixtures had a dead tube. The other buzzed and lit when she flipped the switch, which surprised her. It meant the power was on. Someone was paying that bill too. She stood in the kitchen and put her hands on the prep table and felt the steel under her palms. Cold, solid, level. The Vulcan range had 4 burners and a flat-top section on the right. She turned one knob. Nothing. The gas would need to be reconnected. But the knob turned smoothly. No corrosion. No seizing. She opened the oven door. Clean inside. Not recently used, but clean. Someone had cleaned it. She went through to the residential addition at the rear. The connecting door was a solid core interior door with a deadbolt, key not present. She'd work on that. She tried the knob, unlocked, and went through. The living space was one room with a low ceiling and a dormer window facing north, a small bathroom, and a kitchen alcove with a 2-burner electric cooktop and a half-sized refrigerator. A single bed frame, iron, no mattress. A wooden chair. A small cast-iron radiator under the window that hissed once when she touched it. The boiler was on. Barely. The room was 45 degrees, maybe 50, but the heat was on. She sat on the bed frame and looked at the room. The walls were bare. The window was clean. Recently cleaned, she thought. No grime track on the glass. Someone had been maintaining this property. Not renovating, not upgrading, just maintaining. Keeping it from going all the way to ruin. She didn't know who. She didn't know when it had started. She thought about the oiled hinges and the clean oven and the power and the heat, and she made a mental note to find out. She ate a peanut butter sandwich standing at the kitchen alcove counter. She'd packed a half loaf of bread, a jar of Jif, a box of instant coffee, and a saucepan. She boiled water and made the coffee in a ceramic mug she'd kept from the marriage. Plain white, no chip. She stood at the dormer window with the mug and looked out at the back of the property. Dead grass, a bare tree, what might have been a garden bed along the fence. A small outbuilding at the far corner, shed-sized, wooden, with a gambrel roof. She hadn't gone out to it yet. She would. She brought the work table in from the truck. It took her an hour and a bruised knuckle to maneuver it through the front door and into the kitchen, where it fit against the right-hand wall like it had been measured for. Maybe it had. She stood back and looked at it in the kitchen's buzzing light and felt something she didn't try to name. She set her duffel on the bed frame and hung her coat on the back of the door. Then she went to the work table and opened the left side drawer and lifted out the false panel and set it on the table's surface. She counted the envelopes first. There were 27 of them. Some were plain white, some were cream. Some had gone soft and brown at the edges with age. Each one had her name on it, Ruth, written in Eleanor's small, precise handwriting. No last name, just Ruth. Some had years written in the upper left corner, 1981, 1985, 1990. Some had just a season, spring, Christmas, summer. Some had no marking at all. Under the envelopes was the tin box. It was a Danish butter cookie tin, the blue kind, with a winter scene on the lid, horses pulling a sleigh, snow, a lamplit window. She'd eaten cookies from a tin exactly like it at her grandmother's house when she was 5 years old. She set it aside and picked up the brass key. Small, old-fashioned, with a round bow and a cylindrical shaft. A metal tag on the red twine, stamped with the number 7. She held the key in her palm for a moment. Then she set it on the table and picked up the envelopes and sorted them roughly by year. The earliest envelope she could date was 1981. Ruth had been born in 1960. She had been 21 in 1981. She opened the 1981 envelope. The paper inside was folded twice. She unfolded it. It was a single sheet of cream-colored stationery with a faint floral border at the top, the kind that used to come in boxed sets from the drugstore. Eleanor's handwriting. She read it. Ruth, if you're reading this, I imagine some time has passed. I'm writing it in August of 1981, a Tuesday, about 6 in the morning before I open the shop. I have been trying to figure out how to tell you something for a while now, and I keep deciding it's not the right time. You are 21 and you have your life in front of you, and I don't want to put things in your hands before you're ready to hold them. But I want you to know the building is yours. I've been trying to make sure of that since before you were born. The bakery is not much to look at, and the equipment is old, and I know you never wanted to stay in Harlan Springs. That's all right. I'm not asking you to stay. I'm just asking you to know it's here. There is a reason I am writing this down instead of saying it. Your father's family tried twice to claim an interest in the property when he and I separated. They failed both times. But I learned something from that. I learned that a thing you say can be argued against. A thing written down and put in a proper place is harder to argue against. I am working on the harder to argue kind. Your Uncle Raymond, who is a better man than he gets credit for, is helping me. There's more to it than the building. That's all I'll say for now. When the time is right, I'll have it set up so you can find the rest. I am proud of you. I am always proud of you. You work hard and you don't complain, and you take care of the people around you even when they don't notice. I notice. More to come. Don't lose the key. Your mother, Eleanor Ruth, folded the letter and set it in her lap. She sat on the upturned produce crate she'd brought from the truck and used as a chair. The fluorescent fixture buzzed above her. The kitchen was cold enough that she could see her breath in faint puffs when she exhaled. She looked at the remaining 26 envelopes. She looked at the key with its stamped number on 7. She looked at the blue tin with the winter scene and the horses in the snow and the lamplit window. She pressed the 1981 letter flat against the front of her coat with both hands and sat there in the yellow-white light and the cold until the window behind her went fully dark. She slept in her coat that first night, on the iron bed frame with a folded moving blanket underneath her and her canvas duffel as a pillow. The radiator worked harder after midnight, and by 3 in the morning, the room had climbed to something closer to 60 degrees. She woke once, heard wind in the bare tree outside the dormer window, and went back to sleep, with her hand resting on the stack of envelopes she'd set on the floor beside her. In the morning, she boiled water for instant coffee and stood at the dormer window and watched the light come up. The back of the property resolved slowly. The dead grass, the fence line, the small wooden outbuilding with the gambrel roof she hadn't gotten to yet. A cardinal landed on the fence post, sat for 10 seconds, left. The sky was the color of raw aluminum. She drank the coffee. She ate the last of the bread, dry, without opening another jar. She had $144 left after the truck rental. She needed to understand what she had before she spent any more of it. She put the stack of envelopes in order on the work table, all 27 of them, rough sorted by year or season where she could tell, and set the tin box and the brass key beside them. She'd read one letter. She would read the rest in time. But the key with the stamped number 7 was pulling at her, and the outbuilding was pulling at her, and she thought the two things might be connected. She pulled on her coat and her boots, the leather ones with the worn-down right heel she'd meant to get resoled for 2 years, and went out the back door. The dead grass crunched. The outbuilding was maybe 12 feet by 16, she guessed as she walked toward it. Wooden board and batten siding, painted the same cream color as the main building. The paint in better shape back here where the wind didn't hit it as directly. A single door with a hasp and a padlock. Old padlock, the body slightly pitted, but when she held the brass key to it, she could see the keyway was the same profile. She turned the key in the padlock. It resisted for a moment, not corroded, just stiff from temperature. And then the shackle released with a clean click. She stood there with the open padlock in her hand. Clean click, like it had been meant to open. She went inside. The town of Harlan Springs was 4 miles north on County Road 4, where it met Route 11. Ruth drove in at 8:40 in the morning in the rented moving truck, which she still had for another day before she needed to return it to the depot in Caldwell, 12 miles east. She hadn't planned to go into town so soon, but she needed gas. The truck was below a quarter tank, and she needed food. And she had seen a name on a flyer stapled to a telephone pole at the Route 11 intersection. Goss's Dry Goods and Feed, Esteter, 1954. The name stopped her. Goss had been her mother's name. She pulled into the gas station on the main street, a 2-pump operation called Harlan Quick Stop. The concrete apron cracked and heaved by decades of frost, and paid $31 cash for a fill and a small bag of groceries. Bread, peanut butter, a box of instant oats, 2 cans of soup, a banana. The man behind the counter was young and had nothing to say to her, which was fine. The dry goods store was 2 blocks east on Main, between a closed insurance office and a barber shop with a striped pole that was actually turning. The dry goods sign was hand-lettered on a wooden board, the letters in green paint with a thin gold outline, and the window display was a modest arrangement of seed packets, work gloves in a tin pail, and a small handwritten card that said, "Open 7 to 5 MSAT." She pushed the door open. The bell above it was a genuine mechanical bell, not electronic, a small brass dome on a spring, the kind that made a sound like a single xylophone note. The inside of the store smelled like sawdust and linseed oil, and something faintly sweet she couldn't immediately place. The floor was wide plank pine, worn smooth and dark in the traffic paths. To the right, shelves of hardware, boxes of screws, rolls of weather stripping, a peg display of hose fittings. To the left, dry goods, bags of flour stacked waist-high, canned goods, a small cooler of eggs and butter and cheese. In the back, a work table where a woman was standing with her back to the door, writing something on a receipt pad. She was 64 or 65, Ruth guessed, with white hair pulled back in a knot secured with what appeared to be a finish nail. Not decoratively, but practically. The way someone uses what's in reach. Her hands were large for her frame, with the kind of knuckles that came from years of real work. She wore a canvas apron over a flannel shirt, and she finished writing before she turned around. She turned around. She looked at Ruth. She didn't say anything for a moment. Ruth said, "I'm looking for whatever's related to Goss, the name on the sign." The woman studied her. Her eyes were gray and direct, and she had the unhurried manner of someone who had seen most things and wasn't startled by any of them. "Raymond Goss was my husband," she said. "He died in 2014. I'm Vera. The store was his family's." She paused. "Eleanor's brother." Ruth stood still. "Eleanor Goss," Vera said. "Your mother. You knew her." "Knew her. Fed her coffee every Saturday morning for 30 years when she was in Harlan Springs, and wrote letters back and forth after she moved north." Vera set her receipt pad on the work table and came around to the front of the store. She looked at Ruth steadily, the way you look at someone you've been expecting without knowing exactly when. "You look like her around the eyes, same way of standing still." Ruth didn't say anything. She stood still. Vera went to the left side of the store, to the cooler, and took out 2 eggs and a small wedge of yellow cheese without asking. She went to the shelf and took down a can of crushed tomatoes. She set them on the counter near the register. Then she looked at Ruth. "You eat breakfast?" "I had coffee." "That's not breakfast." Vera moved to a hot plate on the back counter and set a small cast-iron skillet on it. She cracked both eggs. She cut 4 slices from a loaf of bread on the counter and put them in a toaster oven. She grated the cheese with a box grater without looking up. She worked with the economy of someone who had done this particular sequence 10,000 times and saw no reason to discuss it. Ruth sat on the stool at the counter and watched her. Vera set a plate in front of her, eggs over easy, toast, a small side of sliced cheese, and poured 2 mugs of coffee from a stovetop percolator and set one at Ruth's elbow. She stood on the other side of the counter and drank from hers and waited. Ruth ate. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until the fork was in her hand. She ate all of it. When the plate was clean, Vera refilled the coffee without asking. Ruth put her hand in her coat pocket. "Don't," Vera said. Ruth left the money in her pocket. "Raymond kept up the taxes on the building," Vera said, not as a preamble to anything, just as a fact. "After Eleanor died. He said Eleanor had set aside the money for it in a separate account, and he was just the custodian. Kept the heat on in winter, oiled the hinges twice a year because he said a seized hinge was the first thing that goes wrong. I've been doing it since he passed." She paused. "I had a key." "The hinges," Ruth said. "The hinges," Vera confirmed. She reached beneath the counter and came up with a small brown paper bag, folded at the top. She set it on the counter between them. "Raymond left this for you. Specifically. He said if Eleanor's daughter ever came down, I was to give her this in the name of a man named Delbert Crane at the county recorder's office." She slid the bag toward Ruth. Ruth opened it. Inside was a pocket-sized spiral notebook, the cover worn soft. Raymond's name in pen on the inside front cover. Below his name, a number. Account number 7, First Harlan Savings, with a balance written in pencil, $14,340, and a date. March 2014, 2 months before Raymond died. There was also a folded receipt for a safe deposit box. Box 7, First Harlan Savings Bank, Main Street, with a rental term of 30 years paid in full, expiring 2031. Ruth looked at the brass key in her coat pocket. She'd been carrying it since last night. Number 7, Vera was watching her. "The bank is 3 blocks west," Vera said. "Delbert Crane is at the recorder's office on Harlan Street, Brown Building, 2nd floor. He's expecting someone, he just didn't know when." Ruth looked at the notebook, the receipt, the key. She looked at Vera. "Why didn't anyone contact me?" she asked. Vera picked up her coffee mug. "Raymond wrote to you twice. Your husband's name was on the return letters." She said it without inflection. She took a drink of coffee. "Raymond assumed you knew and had reasons for staying away. He kept on anyway." Ruth pressed her hand flat against the counter. "Kept on anyway." She thought about Craig Pelham, the yellow legal pad, the pen clicking 18 times. "Thank you," she said. "Bring the mug back when you're in town next," Vera said and turned back to her receipt pad. She went to the bank first. First, Harland Savings was a one-story brick building with a green canvas awning and a lobby that smelled like warm paper and carpet cleaner. The safe deposit boxes were in a room off the main lobby, a narrow room lined floor to ceiling with brass-fronted drawers in descending sizes. Box 7 was in the middle row, medium-sized. The bank manager, a thin man named Howard who moved carefully and spoke quietly, walked her through the verification, the rental receipt, Ruth's ID, the key, and left her alone in the room. She turned the key in the lock. The box slid out on smooth tracks. She set it on the small table the room provided. She lifted the lid. The box was full. Not disorganized, not stuffed. Full and arranged with the same quiet deliberateness she was beginning to associate with Eleanor Goss. On top was a manila envelope marked Deed and Trust, read first. Under it, a second manila envelope marked Savings Bonds. Under that, a bundle of smaller envelopes held together with a rubber band, each one labeled in Eleanor's handwriting. Ruth, 1962. Ruth, 1963. Going up in years all the way through Ruth, 2008. 46 envelopes. One for every year from Ruth's second birthday to the year before Eleanor died. Ruth stood with her hands on the edge of the box. The room was quiet. The fluorescent light above her was steady, no flicker. The box sat on the table and the envelope sat in the box, and she understood without opening a single one that her mother had been doing this for 46 years. One a year. Setting something aside. Saying something. Putting it in a box with a number 7 lock and paying the rent on it for 30 years and entrusting the key to a brother who oiled hinges twice a year for a decade after she was gone. She took the Deed and Trust envelope first. She sat at the table and opened it. Inside was the property deed, the original, with Eleanor's name and the 2003 transfer on death designation to Ruth Ann Macklin. Clipped to it was a 2-page trust document prepared by a lawyer in Harlan Springs named Walter Poole. The firm was Poole & Associates, the address on Harlan Street, establishing the Eleanor M. Goss Revocable Living Trust with Ruth Ann Macklin as sole beneficiary. The trust had been funded. The assets listed included the real property at 4 County Road 4, the safe deposit box contents, and a savings account at First Harlan Savings. She turned to the savings bonds envelope. She opened it and spread the bonds on the table. 31 savings bonds. The earliest dated 1975, the latest 2007. Face values ranging from $50 to $500. She did the rough math in her head, then stopped and did it more carefully on the back of the manila envelope with a pen from her coat pocket. The face values totaled $8,450. But these were mature bonds. Most of them were 30-year bonds purchased decades ago, and she knew enough about savings bonds to know the interest compounded. She'd need a calculator and a reference table, but the matured value was not $8,450. It was closer to 3 or 4 times that. She sat with that for a moment. Then she looked at the 46 birthday envelopes. She picked up the one marked Ruth, 1981, the same year as the letter she'd found in the work table's hidden drawer. Eleanor had been writing 2 versions, one for the drawer in the table, one for the box. She didn't open this one. She understood that she had a great deal of reading ahead of her, and she wanted to do it right. She wanted to give each letter its proper time. She repacked the box in the order she'd found it, took the deed and trust documents and savings bonds in the 2 manila envelopes. They were hers to take, Howard confirmed, and left the birthday envelopes in the box. She'd come back for those. She had until 2031. She returned the box to its drawer, thanked Howard, and walked back to the truck. Then she drove back out to County Road 4 and went inside and stood in the kitchen for a long time looking at the work table and the stack of envelopes from the false bottom and the tin box she still hadn't opened and the key she now understood completely. She made a cup of instant coffee. She stood at the pass-through window and looked into the main room. The linoleum floor, the long stainless counter, the empty shelving, the chair rail molding, the ghost of letters above the window where her mother's sign had been. Then she went out the back door and across the dead grass to the outbuilding and went inside again. And this time she stood in it longer and looked at everything more carefully. The inside of the outbuilding was a workshop, a proper one. A woodworking bench along the left wall with a vise bolted at the left end, the jaws faced with maple blocks, the screw mechanism well oiled. Above the bench, a pegboard hung with hand tools, chisels in ascending widths, hand planes in 2 sizes, a set of card scrapers, a marking gauge, a wooden mallet, a half-dozen layout squares. The tools were not new. They were old and well kept, the chisels ground sharp, the plane irons flat, the handles worn smooth at the grip. These were tools that had been used and maintained over decades. Along the back wall, 3 pieces of furniture stood covered with moving blankets held in place with bungee cords. Ruth lifted the first blanket. A cabinet. Oak, she thought, or possibly white ash. She'd need better light to be sure. Mortise and tenon construction at the corners, the joints fitted so cleanly she had to run her fingernail along the seam to find the line. Raised panel doors. The hardware was hand-forged iron pulls. On the inside of the left door, a small rectangle of paper glued to the wood. Eleanor's handwriting, for the kitchen at County Road 4. Made by your grandfather, Henry Goss, 1961. Ruth set the blanket down carefully. She lifted the second blanket, a rocking chair. Maple, with a woven cane seat and back, the caning intact, not cracked, not sagging, tight and even. The arms curved with the kind of gentle arc you got from a spokeshave worked by someone who understood wood the way bakers understood heat. A paper tag tied to the right arm with kitchen twine for Ruth. Made by Raymond Goss, 1989. She would have been 29. She lifted the third blanket, a writing desk. Cherry wood, the grain rich and reddish in the gray February light coming through the single window. 4 drawers on the right side, dovetail construction, the pins and tails cut by hand. She could see the slight irregularities that machine-cut dovetails didn't have. A leather writing surface inset in the top, the leather deep green, slightly faded. A tag on the underside of the writing surface in handwriting she didn't recognize immediately, then did. It was Raymond's, not Eleanor's, for my niece Ruth, who deserved better luck and is going to get some. RG, 2012. She sat on the floor of the outbuilding in her coat and looked at the 3 pieces of furniture and the cherry writing desk and Raymond's tag, and she pressed the back of her hand against her mouth and held it there. She stayed like that for 4 minutes. Then she got up and covered the furniture again, carefully, and went back inside. If you've made it this far into Ruth's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. She had found the longest letter in the tin box, the Danish butter cookie tin with the winter scene and the horses and the sleigh. She'd opened it the night before, after returning from the bank, sitting at the work table in the kitchen with a second cup of instant coffee going cold beside her. Inside the tin was a bundle of folded pages, more pages than any of the other letters, tied with the same red twine as the key. The outside of the bundle was labeled in Eleanor's writing, for Ruth, the whole of it. She'd read it that night. All of it. She'd read it twice. The letter was written on lined paper from a yellow legal pad, the same kind, Ruth noticed, that Craig Pelham had used in the conference room, which seemed like a coincidence too pointed to be comfortable. The pages were numbered in the upper right corner, 1 through 9. The date at the top of the first page was October 14th, 2008. Eleanor would have died the following spring. Ruth, I'm writing this in October, which is always when I think most clearly. You know how I feel about October. The light is different and the work is slower, and there's time to say things properly. I am going to say some things I should have said in person. I am sorry for that. I will explain why I didn't, and I think you'll understand, even if understanding doesn't make it easier. First, the property at County Road 4 is yours, has always been yours, and I have done everything in my power to make certain no one can take it from you. Your Uncle Raymond has helped me every step of the way. The trust is set up correctly. The deed transfer is on record. The taxes will be paid through the account Raymond is watching. I do not want you to spend 1 hour worrying about whether it is secure. It is secure. Now the harder part. You know your father, Robert, and I separated when you were 4 years old. What I never told you, because you were 4, and then you were 8, and then you were 12, and there was never a right time, is that when we separated, Robert's family made a claim against the bakery. They said Robert had put money into the building and was entitled to a share. This was not true. Not 1 cent of Robert's family's money went into that building. My grandmother left me $600 when she died, and I put it into the down payment in 1958 before I ever met Robert, and I worked 60-hour weeks for 11 years to pay the mortgage, but Robert's brother, a man named Carl, who I will not be charitable about in this letter, hired a lawyer and filed a lien, and it cost me $1,100. I didn't have to fight it. I won. It took 14 months and it cost me money I didn't have, but I won. And after that, I decided to be more careful. I decided that the bakery needed to be invisible to anyone who might try to take it. I stopped running it as a business. I kept the license current, paid the taxes, kept the equipment maintained, but I closed the front door. I moved north to be near you. I decided I would rather be present in your life than be a baker in Harlan Springs with a building that kept attracting bad faith claims. That decision cost me something. I want to be honest about that. I loved that kitchen. I loved getting up at 4 in the morning when the town was still dark and turning on the Vulcan range and listening to the burners catch. I loved the weight of the dough and the smell of the oven and the women who came in every Saturday for the cardamom rolls. I gave all of that up, and I do not regret it. But I want you to know it was a real thing I gave up, not a small thing. There is something else I need to tell you, and this one is harder. The year you turned 16, you came home from school in March, and I was sitting at the kitchen table and I had been crying. You asked me what was wrong, and I told you nothing, work. You believed me, or you pretended to, because you were 16 and you were kind, and you understood that adults sometimes need to be allowed their privacy. What was actually wrong was that your father had been in a car accident in Roanoke County in January, and had died in the hospital on February 28th. I found out 3 weeks after the fact from Raymond, who heard from a man who knew someone. I did not tell you because I did not know how to explain the whole of it. Robert and I had not spoken in over 10 years. There was no relationship to grieve in the way you grieve a father who was present, and I was afraid that telling you would raise questions I couldn't answer without explaining things I wasn't ready to explain. I was wrong to keep it from you. I have known that for a long time. I am sorry. You had a right to know your father had died, whatever your feelings about him were. I made a decision that was about my own fear, not about your needs, and I have carried the regret of it every day since. You asked me once, when you were about 26, if I thought you were like him. I said I thought you had his eyes. That was true. What I should have also said, what I should have said instead of just that, is that you have my stubbornness and my hands and the way I always needed to be doing something useful with them, and that those things are more you than his eyes will ever be. Now the third thing, this one I am glad to tell. In 1981, the year you married Dennis, the year you told me you were in love and the future felt like something you could walk toward with both hands open, I began putting money aside. Not for a reason I could name then. Just because I could feel that you would need something someday that I wouldn't be around to hand you directly. I bought the first savings bond in March of that year. $50. It seemed absurd. I remember thinking, what is $50? And then I thought, in 30 years it will be something, and in 30 years after that it will be something else. And so I bought it. I bought one a year after that, sometimes two. I put them in the safe deposit box that Raymond had the key to, and I added to the account every time I had anything to spare. I did not tell you, because I did not want you to feel watched over. I did not want you to feel that I doubted your ability to manage your own life. I was not doubting you. I was simply preparing, the way I always prepared, getting the dough started the night before so the morning would be easier. You will find, when you go through everything, that the bonds alone are worth somewhere around $31,000 at maturity. There is also the building, which I believe is worth more than people think if someone puts good work into it. And there is the furniture your father's people never knew about and couldn't touch. I want you to use it as you see fit. If you want to sell the building and use the money to start over somewhere else, do that. If you want to reopen the bakery, do that. The Vulcan range still works. Raymond had it serviced in 2004, and there are no bad burners. The deck oven is in the outbuilding under a tarp. I couldn't fit it inside, but it's covered, and it held up well when Raymond checked it in 2006. If you want to bake, there is a kitchen for you to bake in, and your grandmother's cabinet in the workshop, and a town that had a bakery for 20 years and then didn't have one anymore and probably misses it more than they say. Whatever you do, do not let anyone persuade you that you came too late or that you have no right to something that was made for you. The timing was mine, and the timing was what it was. And you came exactly when you were meant to. I want to tell you one more thing before I close this letter, and I want to say it plainly because I have not always been plain about it, and I should have been. When you were 3 days old, they put you in my arms in the hospital, and you looked directly at me. Not at the light, not at the ceiling, directly at me. And I thought, everything I do from this moment is for her. I thought that, and I meant it, and I have not stopped meaning it once in all the time since. Every bond, every paid tax bill, every oiled hinge, every letter I wrote and put in an envelope with your name on it, all of it was the same thought in a different shape. I loved you every single day, every single one. Don't let anyone tell you you weren't worth that. Your mother, Eleanor M. Goss, October 14th, 2008. Ruth had set the letter down on the work table when she finished the second reading. She had not moved for a long time. She watched the light in the kitchen shift from late evening gray to the particular darkness that comes after 9 on a February night in the country. A thick dark, a dark without ambient glow. The fluorescent fixture buzzed. The radiator in the back room ticked. Outside, nothing. She thought about Craig Pelham and his yellow legal pad and the 2 letters Raymond had sent to her address that had come back with Dennis's name on them. She thought about her father dying in a hospital in Roanoke County in February of a year when she was 16 and sitting at a desk in a school somewhere doing algebra or reading Hemingway or passing a note to a friend. She had not known. She had eaten dinner that night and done her homework and not known. She thought about the $50 savings bond from March 1981, her wedding year. Eleanor sitting at a kitchen table with a $50 bill, not a check, Ruth imagined cash, she couldn't say why, and filling out the bond application and doing the math on what it would be worth in 30 years. She made the coffee she'd been ignoring. She drank it cold. She washed the mug in the utility sink and set it upside down on a dish towel on the prep table and stood in the kitchen in the dark, except for the range hood light she'd left on, a thin yellow strip of light falling across the quarry tile floor. She took the letter to the back room and lay down on the bed frame with the moving blanket over her and held the 9 pages against her chest with one hand and listened to the wind in the bare tree until she slept. She was in the main room the next morning, measuring the front windows with a tape measure she'd found in the workshop. A Stanley 25-foot tape, the case cracked, the blade still good, when she heard a car turn into the gravel apron out front. A car, not a truck. The sound of good tires on gravel, which is a different sound from work truck tires. Slower, more deliberate. She looked through the front window. The car was a black Audi sedan, current model, clean despite the February road grit that coated everything in Harland County. It pulled to a stop and a man got out. He was in his early 50s, in a wool overcoat the color of charcoal, and he moved with the confidence of someone whose shoes were always clean. He looked at the building for a moment. Not the way you look at a thing you're discovering, but the way you look at a thing you've already decided about. And then he walked to the front door. Ruth opened it before he knocked. He was taller than she'd expected. His hair was silver at the temples in a way that seemed deliberate. He held a business card between 2 fingers and extended it. "Ms. Macklin," he said. Not a question. She took the card. "Mitchell Farrow," she read. "Farrow Land and Development Partners, LLC, a Fairfield address." "I'm Mitchell Farrow," he said. "I represent a group of investors with a strong interest in this corridor of County Road 4. We've been watching several properties in the area." "Watching?" Ruth said. "Monitoring the market." He smiled. It was a considered smile. "This property came to our attention some time ago. I wasn't certain of the ownership situation until recently." He paused there, just a half beat. "I'd like to extend an offer. Informal at this stage, a letter of intent. The figure we have in mind is $118,000. Ruth looked at him. $118,000. The assessed value was $94,000. He was coming in above assessed. That meant he had reason to believe the real value was higher, and he was hoping she didn't know that. "I'm not selling," she said. His expression didn't change. "I understand this property has been sitting unused for some years. The infrastructure along this road is likely to see significant investment from county development funds in the next 18 months. The value picture changes fairly quickly in that kind of environment." He paused. "But timing matters." "I'm not selling," Ruth said again. He looked past her into the main room, a glance that lasted 2 seconds. Then he looked back at her and nodded once. "Of course." He reached into his overcoat pocket and produced a second card. The same card, the same stock, and held it out. "In case anything changes, or in case you have questions about what's happening with zoning in this area, there are some conversations at the county level worth knowing about." Ruth took the card, not because she wanted it, because taking it ended the conversation. Farrow walked back to the Audi. He got in without looking back. The car pulled out onto County Road 4 and headed north toward Route 11, the tires quiet on the gravel. Ruth stood in the doorway for a moment after the car was gone. The February air came through the open door. She looked at the 2 business cards, one in each hand. Mitchell Farrow, Farrow Land and Development Partners, Fairfield address. She thought about Craig Pelham in Fairfield with his legal pad and his pen clicking. She thought about Raymond's 2 letters coming back with Dennis's name on them. She went inside. She set both cards on the stainless counter. She picked up her tape measure and found her place on the front window frame and wrote down the measurement, 36 inches by 54 inches, double hung. She'd need new weather stripping on both sashes. On the back of the manila envelope with the deed in it, she kept working. But the number Farrow had mentioned, 18 months, county development funds, zoning conversations, sat in her like a stone in the bottom of a jar. She measured the second window. She wrote it down. She thought, "I have not come this far to be timed out." She set the tape measure on the counter. She picked up Pharaoh's card. She turned it over. The back was blank. She set it back down. She picked up the tape measure and kept working. The formal letter arrived on a Thursday, 11 days after Mitchell Pharaoh's visit. Ruth had been sleeping in the back room on a cot she'd bought for $34 at the Harland Springs hardware store. A simple folding cot with a canvas surface which was better than the iron bed frame. And she was up before 6, the way her mother had been up before 6, though she hadn't thought about it in those terms until just then. Standing at the 2-burner cooktop, waiting for water to boil. She heard the mail carrier's truck on the gravel. She went out in her coat and boots to the rural box at the end of the gravel drive and found 2 pieces of mail. The first was a circular from a farm supply company addressed to current resident. The second was a legal-sized envelope from the law offices of Calder, Prine and Associates in Fairfield. The return address printed in a clean serif font that announced itself as expensive. She stood at the mailbox in the February cold and opened it. The letter inside was dated February 28th. It was 3 pages. The language was formal and dense, but the substance was not complicated. A man named Gerald Stokes, described as a distant cousin of Eleanor M. Goss through the family of Carl Goss, Robert's brother, the same Carl Eleanor had named in her letter, was filing a challenge to the transfer on death designation on the property deed, on the grounds that Eleanor Goss had lacked the cognitive capacity to execute the 2003 filing. A hearing before the Harland County Probate Court had been scheduled for March 19th, 3 weeks away. Ruth read it twice. The cold worked through her coat. She folded the letter back into the envelope and looked down the length of County Road 4, the bare trees and the gray road, and the sky the same aluminum color it had been since she arrived. She looked at the envelope. Calder, Prine and Associates. She did not know the firm, but she knew Fairfield. She knew who worked in Fairfield. She went inside. She set the envelope on the work table. She stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the back of the property, the outbuilding, the dead grass, the bare tree. And she thought about what $144 had become. She'd spent carefully. She had $61 left in her wallet and $180 remaining in her account after the cot and the groceries and a half-gallon of turpentine she'd bought to clean the workshop tools. The savings bonds were hers, but she hadn't cashed them yet. She needed to do that. She needed to do a great number of things, and 3 weeks was not very much time. She thought about the truck. She could load the cot and the duffel and drive north. She knew how to find work. She was 62 and she had baked and cooked and cleaned and managed a household for 31 years, and she could find work. She thought about all of that clearly and without drama, the way you think about a door that's available to you. She sat on the cot for 6 minutes. She counted the money in her wallet. She looked at the manila envelope with the deed and the trust document. She looked at the work table that had been in Eleanor's kitchen, and then Eleanor's house, and then the storage unit, and was now back in the building it was made for. She got up. She put her coat back on. She drove into Harland Springs. Vera was at the back of the dry goods store when Ruth came in, the mechanical bell sounding its single xylophone note. She was stacking 50-pound bags of flour with a hand truck, the kind of work that most people would have asked someone younger to do. She looked up, assessed Ruth's expression with the efficiency of someone long practiced at reading what people didn't say, and came around to the counter. Ruth set the Calder, Prine letter on the counter. Vera read it without picking it up. She stood over it and read it through once. Then she straightened up and looked at Ruth. "Carl Goss's side," she said. "That's what it says." Carl Goss has been dead for 6 years. His son Gerald has been trying to squeeze something out of Raymond's side of the family since before Raymond died. Raymond paid him off twice to go away. Small amounts, $300 the first time, $500 the second. Kept a record of both. Vera opened a drawer under the counter and produced a small green ledger, the kind with the mottled cardboard cover. She opened it to a page near the back. 2 entries in Raymond's handwriting, dated and itemized. Ruth looked at them. He kept records. Raymond kept records of everything. Vera closed the ledger. Take it with you. That and the ledger both go to Walter Poole on Harlan Street. He prepared your mother's trust, and he's been holding the file for 9 years. He told me when Eleanor died that if this property was ever challenged, he had the documentation to defend it. Ruth picked up the letter. She held the ledger. Did Raymond know this was coming? Vera picked up her coffee mug from behind the counter. Raymond said that when the property showed up on a developer's radar, and he believed it would eventually because the county was going to run a water line out that road sooner or later, someone on Carl's side would try to get in front of it. He said he'd made sure there were papers. She drank from the mug and set it down. Go see Walter Poole. Today, not tomorrow. Ruth nodded. She was at the door when Vera said, "Ruth." She turned. "You're allowed to be angry," Vera said, not warmly, not coaxingly, just as a plain statement of fact. "You don't have to be calm about all of this." Ruth stood in the doorway with the bell's note fading above her. "I'll be calm until I don't need to be," she said. Vera's expression shifted slightly, almost to a smile. "That's Eleanor exactly." The sound of tires on the gravel came 2 days later, a Saturday afternoon, and Ruth looked up from the window frame she was resetting. The left front window had developed a gap at the bottom sash that was pulling cold air in, and she'd been working at it with a wood chisel and a tube of glazing compound, and saw a car she didn't recognize pull in. An old Subaru wagon, dark green, one rear bumper corner held on with a zip tie. It sat for a moment, and then the driver's door opened and a young woman got out. She was 20, maybe 21, with a canvas backpack over one shoulder and a second-hand parka that was too thin for the weather. She stood on the gravel and looked at the building and then at the truck and then at Ruth standing in the front doorway with a chisel in her hand. "And I'm not trespassing," the young woman said immediately. "I didn't say you were. I saw the light on. I've been driving for 3 days. I'm not from here." She shifted the backpack. She had the slightly fixed expression of someone working hard to appear less tired than they were. "Is there a place to sleep in this town? A motel or anything?" Ruth looked at her. The thin parka, the 3-day drive. "Where are you coming from?" Ruth asked. "Pittsburgh," the woman said. "I have an aunt in Roanoke, but I'm not ready to get there yet. I thought I'd stop somewhere in between and figure out the next part." Ruth set the chisel on the window ledge. "What's your name?" "Danny," the woman said. "Danielle Marsh." "Danny." Ruth considered the back room. The iron bed frame she hadn't moved, the cot along the other wall, the cast iron radiator that now held the room at a reliable 68 degrees. She thought about a parking lot in Fairfield in February, sitting in a car with fogged windows and $211 in her account. "Come inside," Ruth said. "I'll make something hot." Danny Marsh stood still for a moment, the way you stand when you've been expecting something other than kindness and your body hasn't caught up yet. "I'm working," Ruth added. "If you want to earn a meal, there's a window frame that needs reglazing and I can show you how." Danny came inside. Walter Poole was 71 years old and had an office on the second floor of a building on Harlan Street that smelled like old books and radiator heat. He had prepared Eleanor Goss's trust documents in 2003 and kept the file in a fireproof cabinet behind his desk that he unlocked with a key on a chain attached to his belt. He spread the contents on his desk: the trust agreement, the deed, the signed and notarized transfer on death filing, a sworn affidavit from 2 witnesses attesting to Eleanor's mental clarity at the time of signing, a physician's letter from Eleanor's doctor dated the same month as the trust filing. She anticipated a challenge, Poole said. He was a methodical man with large hands and reading glasses he wore on the end of his nose. She was very specific about it. She said to me in 2003, "I want this to be bulletproof, Walter." Those were her words. Ruth looked at the physician's letter. Eleanor's doctor, a man named Theodore Park, had written 3 paragraphs attesting that Eleanor Goss was in full cognitive possession of her faculties, had discussed the trust provisions with him in detail, and had demonstrated clear understanding of their legal and financial implications. "The cognitive capacity argument won't hold," Poole said, removing his glasses. "Not against a physician's letter from the same month and 2 witnesses who are still living." He picked up Raymond's ledger and looked at the 2 entries. "The payments to Gerald Stokes are also helpful. They established that he had knowledge of the property and made no legal challenge at the time, accepted cash settlements instead. A court will look at that pattern. When do you need to file a response?" "I'll file a motion to dismiss by next Friday," Poole said. "The March 19th hearing is likely to be brief." He paused. "You should be there in person, if you're able." "I'll be there," Ruth said. Poole put his glasses back on and looked at her over the rims. "Your mother was a thorough woman," he said. Ruth picked up the physician's letter and read the first sentence again. She set it down. "Yes," she said. "She was." The word moved through Harlan Springs the way things move through small towns. Not on any specific current, just by the nature of people who have lived alongside each other long enough to know what the other person's car sounds like on the road. By the second week of March, 6 days before the probate hearing, people began showing up at 4 County Road 4. The first was a man named Ed Garber, who arrived on a Tuesday in a pickup truck with 2 coils of 12-gauge Romex wire in the bed and a canvas tool bag over one shoulder. He was 68, retired, with a master electrician's license that he showed Ruth without being asked, the laminated card worn at the corners. "Eleanor Goss wired my mother's house in 1971 for free," he said. "My mother was a widow and had no money, and Eleanor just showed up one Saturday with her brother, and they ran the new service panel themselves. My mother never charged Eleanor for a loaf of bread after that." He looked at the electrical panel in the back room, the old 60-amp service with fuses instead of breakers, the knockouts punched, and the wire entries fitted with the kind of old rubber grommets that had been softening for 40 years. "This is a 60-amp box. You're going to want 200 before you run a commercial range and a deck oven on this service. I can do the upgrade." Ruth looked at the panel. She looked at him. "I can't pay you right now." "Eleanor already paid me," Ed said. He set his tool bag down and opened it and took out a pair of lineman's pliers. "Where do you want to start?" The second was a woman named June Castillo, who came on Thursday with a plumber named Lou Tanner, whom she had apparently called on Ruth's behalf without consulting Ruth. Lou Tanner was 55 and had a PVC cutter in his back pocket, and he looked at the 3-compartment sink and the 2-inch drain line and the corroded gate valve on the cold supply, and shook his head in the particular way plumbers shake their heads when they're about to spend a significant amount of time fixing something. "The supply lines are led to the street connection," Lou said. "They've been holding, but they shouldn't be. I'll run new copper from the meter." "She fed my kids every summer for 2 years," June told Ruth, standing in the kitchen doorway. 1996 and 97 when my husband was laid off. Eleanor kept a standing order. 2 loaves of bread, a dozen rolls, whatever she had extra. And she never once charged me. She said she was just managing inventory. June's expression held something dry and fond at once. Eleanor was always managing inventory. Lou Tanner started on the supply lines that afternoon. He brought a helper the next day, a young man with a propane torch and a good eye for plumb. On Friday, a woman named Clara Briggs arrived with her truck bed full of flats from her garden center. Not ornamental plants, but practical ones. the kind you put in front of a building to signal that someone is paying attention. Ornamental kale, winter pansies in purple and yellow, a flat of dusty Miller. She planted them in the bed along the front of the building, while Ruth was inside watching Ed Garber pull the old 60-amp panel from the wall. On Saturday morning, a retired schoolteacher named Frank Dolan arrived with a cord of split hardwood stacked neatly in his truck bed and unloaded it against the side of the building without asking. He and Danny carried the pieces together, Danny with her hair tied back with a piece of kitchen twine, her thin parka replaced by a flannel shirt she'd borrowed from the workshop pegboard. Ruth watched Frank and Danny stack the wood in the late morning light, the split faces of the hardwood the same pale gold color as the quarry tile floor. And she thought about 9 pages of lined paper and October light and the smell of cardamom rolls. The Harlan County Probate Court hearing on March 19th was in a wood-paneled room on the 2nd floor of the county building on Harlan Street, 6 blocks from Walter Poole's office. Ruth arrived at 8:40 in a blazer she'd bought at the Harlan Springs thrift shop for $9, charcoal gray, slightly large in the shoulders but clean and pressed. She'd ironed it on the work table that morning with an iron she'd found in the workshop wrapped in a cloth, still in working order. Walter Poole was already at the plaintiff's table with his fireproof cabinet documents arranged in order. Gerald Stokes sat at the opposing table with an attorney from Calder, Prine, who was young and had the slightly overdressed look of someone performing competence. Mitchell Farrow was in the gallery. Ruth saw him when she came in. He was not in the charcoal overcoat this time. He was in a dark suit with a tie. He did not look at her. The judge was a woman named Honorable Patricia Sims, who had been on the Harlan County bench for 14 years and had the demeanor of someone who had long since stopped being surprised by what people tried to claim about property. The Calder, Prine attorney, presented the cognitive capacity argument in approximately 8 minutes. He cited the gap between Eleanor's death in 2009 and the current date as evidence of delayed discovery of the potential incapacity. He did not cite specific medical evidence because he had none. Walter Poole presented the physician's letter, the 2 witness affidavits, and Raymond's ledger showing the 2016 and 2018 payments to Gerald Stokes in 14 minutes. He spoke in a plain, measured tone and did not look at Gerald Stokes or his attorney while he spoke. He addressed Judge Sims directly. Judge Sims looked at the physician's letter for a long time. She turned it over as if checking the back. She set it down. "Is there anyone in the gallery who wishes to speak on this matter?" she asked. It was a slightly unusual question for a probate hearing. Several people in the room seemed surprised by it. Vera stood up. She was in the back row of the gallery, the canvas apron replaced by a dark green coat, the finish nail absent from her hair. She stood without waiting to be formally recognized, which produced a mild stir in the room. "I'm Vera Goss," she said, "Raymond Goss's widow. I knew Eleanor for 40 years. Judge Sims looked at her. "You can speak," she said. "Eleanor Goss ran a bakery in this town for 22 years, Vera said. "She closed it in 1980 not because she wanted to, but because she needed to protect it. She spent the next 28 years making sure it would go to her daughter when the time came. She paid every tax bill. She maintained every piece of equipment. She paid an attorney to do the trust correctly. She got a doctor's letter because she knew someone might try this someday." Vera paused. The woman who did all of that did not lack cognitive capacity in 2003 or any other year. She had more capacity than most people I have ever known. She sat down. The room was quiet. Judge Sims looked at her papers. She looked at Walter Poole. She looked at the Calder, Prine attorney, who had nothing to add because there was nothing to add. "Motion to dismiss is granted," Judge Sims said. "The transfer on death designation on the deed at 4 County Road 4, Harlan Springs, recorded August 2003, is valid and in full effect. This matter is closed." She signed the order. The clerk stamped it. The whole proceeding had taken 41 minutes. Ruth sat still for a moment after the gavel. She heard the gallery behind her shift and settle. She heard Walter Poole gathering his papers with his customary deliberateness. She turned and looked at the gallery and saw Ed Garber and June Castillo and Frank Dolan and Clara Briggs and Danny, who had driven in with Clara, who she'd met 2 days ago, sitting in a row like people who had arrived somewhere they'd been meaning to be. She turned back to the front. Mitchell Farrow's seat in the gallery was empty. He had gone out quietly, sometime before the gavel. His absence was its own kind of statement. Walter Poole walked her out. On the courthouse steps, he shook her hand with his large, careful hands. "Come by the office next week," he said. "We'll transfer the savings bonds and get the account situation formalized." He paused. "You'll need a contractor to assess the building before you open commercially. I can give you a name." "I have Ed Garber," Ruth said. Poole considered this. "Ed Garber's better," he said. The bakery opened on the first Saturday of April. Not a grand opening. Ruth had not advertised, had not put anything in the paper, had simply oiled the front door hinges herself the night before, and unlocked the door at 6:30 in the morning and turned on the Vulcan range and let the smell of the oven warming up do whatever it was going to do. By 7:15, there were 4 people at the counter. By 8, there were 11. Ed Garber had finished the 200-amp service upgrade 10 days before. The new panel was a square D load center, the breakers clean and labeled in Ruth's handwriting. The kitchen circuits were all 20-amp, GFCI protected at the sink and the prep stations. Lou Tanner's copper supply lines ran clean and straight from the meter. The joints sweated tight and bright as new pennies where they showed at the connections. The 3-compartment sink drained perfectly. The reach-in refrigerator had been serviced and held 40 degrees without cycling. The deck oven from the outbuilding had required the most work. Ruth had uncovered it from its tarp, a Baker's Pride 2-deck electric oven, circa 1979. The deck stones intact, the heating elements functional but drawing inconsistently on the right side. She'd sourced replacement elements through a restaurant equipment supplier in Caldwell, waited 8 days for delivery, and installed them herself, following the wiring diagram she found taped to the inside of the control panel cover. She'd test-baked on Thursday. The decks ran at 460 degrees, even and steady, front to back. She'd cried a little when the temperature gauge steadied. She'd wiped her face on the back of her hand and gone to write down the settings. The cardamom rolls were Eleanor's recipe, from a card Ruth found in the tin box. The Danish butter cookie tin, blue with the horses and the sleigh, tucked under the bundle of letters. The card was 3 inches by 5 inches, written in pencil on one side. The card stained amber at one corner from where a jar of cardamom had leaked at some point in the 1970s. The recipe called for bread flour, whole milk, butter, eggs, cardamom, ground fresh. Eleanor had underlined this. And a vanilla sugar she made herself from a vanilla bean kept in a jar of granulated sugar that she described only as the jar on the left. Ruth had kept a vanilla bean in a jar of sugar for 3 weeks before the opening. She used it for the rolls. By 9 o'clock, the cardamom rolls were gone. She made more. Those were gone by 10:30. Danny worked the counter. She had been there since 5:30, learning the register. A cash register Ruth had found in the workshop under a piece of canvas, a vintage national cash register in working order, the keys clicking with a satisfying mechanical weight, and the system for the bread display and the way to answer when someone asked what was in a particular roll. Ruth had written the ingredients on index cards and taped them to the counter. Danny had a natural manner with people. She thanked them when they paid, and she remembered who had been in before, and she said things like, "The cardamom rolls go fast, you might want 2, with the easy confidence of someone who had found a place where her instincts were useful. Frank Dolan came in at 9:15 and bought a loaf of the honey wheat bread, and stood at the counter and ate a cardamom roll standing up and said it was exactly like Eleanor's. He didn't say this to Ruth specifically. He said it to the room, which had 5 people in it at that moment, and the room understood what he meant. On the wall beside the pass-through window, Ruth had hung a framed photograph. It was a 4x6 print she'd found in the tin box, black and white, showing Eleanor Goss standing behind the long stainless counter in this same kitchen. Eleanor was in her 30s, in a white apron, both hands flat on the counter surface, looking directly at the camera with an expression that was not quite a smile but was clearly pleased about something. Behind her, the Vulcan range, the deck oven, the pot hooks with pots hanging from them, the quarry tile floor. Ruth had found a simple oak frame at the thrift shop for $4 and fitted the photograph in it and hung it with a single finish nail, level. Vera came in at 10. She looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she went to the counter and told Danny she'd have a coffee, black. And she sat on the stool at the end of the counter and drank it and watched the room with the steady gray eyes that had seen most things and wasn't startled by any of them. Ruth came out of the kitchen with flour on her forearms and set a cardamom roll on a small plate in front of Vera without being asked. Vera looked at it. She broke off a piece. She ate it. She set the piece down. "That's right," she said. "Just that." Ruth went back to the kitchen. At 11, a young man came through the door. He was 19 or 20 with a duffel bag over one shoulder and the look of someone who had been driving a long time and hadn't decided yet where they were going. He stood at the door and looked at the counter and the people at the tables. There were 8 people now, sitting in the folding chairs Ruth had borrowed from the Harlan Springs Volunteer Fire Hall, the proper chairs not yet purchased, and he seemed uncertain whether he was allowed to be there. Ruth was at the pass-through window, looking out at the room, and she saw him. She reached back to the bread shelf and took a cardamom roll and set it on a small plate. She came out of the kitchen and set it on the counter nearest the door. "Come in," she said. "That's for you." He came in. He set the duffel down and sat on the stool and looked at the roll. "I'm not sure I have," he started. "It's already made," Ruth said. "Sit down." He sat. He ate the roll. The room went on around him, the conversation, the sound of Danny working the register, the smell of bread and cardamom and coffee. And he sat in the middle of it and ate and looked slightly less like someone who hadn't decided where he was going. On the evening of that first Saturday, after the door was locked and the register counted, $312 in sales, which was more than she had expected and exactly enough to matter. Ruth turned off the front lights and went through to the back room. She changed out of her flour-dusted apron and washed her arms at the bathroom sink with the bar of soap she kept on the rim, the water running warm now that Lou's copper lines were in. She made a cup of tea on the 2-burner cooktop, not coffee, tea, chamomile from a box she'd bought in town, and took it out the back door and sat on the concrete step. The April evening was cold, but not bitterly. The bare tree had begun to show the first suggestions of buds, small and dark, not yet committed. The sky in the west still held a band of light, pale orange fading to the color of old brass at the horizon. The outbuilding sat quiet, the padlock back on the hasp, the furniture inside. The grandfather's oak cabinet now installed in the main room, the rocking chair in the corner of the back room, the cherry writing desk pushed against the dormer wall where it caught the morning light. Ruth held the mug with both hands and looked at the evening. She thought about the oiled hinges. She had oiled them herself last night, with the same 3-in-1 oil she'd found on the workshop shelf. The same brand her Uncle Raymond would have used, the cap worn from years of opening and closing. She had stood in the dark outside the front door and applied the oil to the top hinge pin first, then the bottom, turning the pin to work it in, the way her mother had probably taught someone and that someone had passed along without knowing they were passing it along. Small things. She set the mug on the step beside her and reached into the pocket of her flannel shirt. The brass key, number 7, on its loop of faded red twine. She'd been carrying it since the first night. She turned it in her fingers in the failing light, The bow and the shaft and the worn collar where the twine had rubbed for years in someone's pocket before hers. She thought about 46 envelopes in a safe deposit box, one for each year. She'd read 6 of them so far. She was rationing them, the way you ration something you know is finite and want to last. She would not rush. There was no rush anymore. The band of light in the west had narrowed to a thread. The outbuilding's gambrel roof showed as a dark shape against the sky. The cast-iron radiator in the back room made its familiar ticking sound through the open door. She thought about the things you do for someone without knowing if they'll ever find them. The savings, bond in March 1981. The trust document in 2003. The oiled hinges twice a year. Raymond in his work coat with the 3-in-1 oil. Nobody watching, nobody needing to know. The things you do because they are the right preparation, and the right preparation is its own reason. You don't do those things to be thanked. You do them because someone might need what you've done someday, and that possibility is enough. That is its own complete thought. She picked up the mug. The tea had gone lukewarm. She drank it anyway. Inside, she heard Danny moving around in the kitchen. The sound of the prep table being wiped down, the squeak of the utility sink handle, the lights clicking off one by one. The sounds of a kitchen at the end of a day. Ruth sat on the concrete step with the brass key in her palm and the empty mug beside her and the April dark coming in from the east. The orange thread at the horizon was gone now. The sky was the deep blue that comes just before dark, and in the main room window, the warm light was still on, falling out onto the gravel apron and the front bed where Clara's winter pansies had opened in the first week of April, purple and yellow, bright and matter-of-fact. She set the key on the step beside the mug. She looked at it there in the last of the light, the brass worn to a soft gold, the number 7 stamped in the tag. She thought about putting it on a hook somewhere inside, somewhere visible, somewhere that meant she had arrived and was staying. She picked it up and went inside and did exactly that. Drove a finish nail above the door frame with 3 clean strokes of the wooden mallet from the workshop and hung the key by its red twine, where the first light from the kitchen window would find it every morning. Then she turned off the last light and went to bed. The bakery window held its glow on the gravel for a few minutes after. Then that too went dark, and the street was quiet, and Harlan Springs settled into its Saturday night, unhurried and complete.